One of Dewey's key words, one of his most important words, is adjustment. And this means that ends and means have to be adjusted to one another in successful inquiry. Ends and means are richly informative of one another in successful inquiry. And we know in the history of the Cold War, for instance, that we had the ends justifying the means. And as a result, we're still cleaning up places like Hanford and Rocky Flats. Things are even worse in parts of Central and Eastern Europe. I was struggling to find a case. I was on my way to the Air Force Academy to give a lecture, and I was struggling to find a case where the means had actually dominated the ends. And it occurred to me that the American experience in Southeast Asia in the 1960s and 70s was just a case of that, because there were no clear ends. The idea was we had the means, but we weren't sure exactly what those ends should be. Now, it's one thing for ends to be flexible, it's another for them to be vague. And Dewey thought that ends should be flexible, but they shouldn't be vague. And the American ends in Southeast Asia always tended to be rather vague. Dewey was fond of repeating a story that had been told by Charles Lamb, the English essayist. And it involves a farmer who goes away to market one day, and he comes home and finds that his barn has burned down, and in it was his prize pig. Surveying the charred remains of the barn and the unfortunate pig, he reaches down to see if there's any life left in his prize pig. He touches the charred body of his beloved pig and burns his finger. Instinctively, bringing his finger to his mouth to cool it, he discovers roast pork. Now, what does this farmer do? Well, he begins to build more barns, put pigs in them, and burn them down. Now, if there's no connection between ends and means, then this farmer's activity was totally rational. Dewey's point here is that ends and means operate within the context of one another. There's more to be said about that in the context of theory and practice. For Aristotle, theory is the highest of the sciences. Practical activities come next, and then practical activities become next, and then the lowest form is production. Dewey didn't invert that model, but he did say that theory and practice are not really hierarchical. What they are collaborators, like good business people. And theory invests itself in the needs of practice. Practice invests itself in the needs of theory. And like two good business people, the outcome is a product. One more quick comment about this matter. Dewey was quite often accused of being a consequentialist. Now, what that means is that they thought he was a kind of a hip utilitarian. That is, looking for the greatest good of the greatest number, looking at the consequences and measuring our activities in terms of the consequences that were achieved. And Dewey, over and over, let people know that he was not a consequentialist, he was not a utilitarian, and he distinguished consequences from consummations. And there's almost a sexual innuendo or sexual connotation here. There are many kinds of consequences, and not all of them are good. But a consummation is a bringing to fruition of some activity that is able to balance ends and means.